What if one of humanity's oldest memories was not a memory of how the world began, but of how it almost ended? Long before history was written in books, long before cities knew the names of science, long before people could measure storms, tides, rivers, and coastlines, ancient civilizations across the world kept telling a strangely familiar story. The sky darkens. The rain does not stop. Rivers rise beyond their banks. Seas swallow the land. The world that once felt solid becomes water. Homes vanish. Fields disappear. Temples sink. And human pride is carried away by a force no king can command. Yet somewhere, someone survives. A man warned by a god. A family sealed inside a boat. A chosen survivor climbing toward a mountain. A seed, an animal, a memory, or a sacred law carried through the waters so that the world can begin again. The names change from culture to culture, but the pattern remains hauntingly similar. A flood comes, the old world is erased, and humanity is given one more chance. This is the mystery of the Great Flood. It appears in Mesopotamia, in Greece, in India, in China, in the Americas, in island cultures, river cultures, mountain cultures, and desert cultures. These civilizations were separated by oceans, languages, centuries, and gods. Yet again and again they imagined the same terrible event, a world drowned beneath divine or cosmic water. So why did so many cultures remember a flood? Was it only because floods were common in the ancient world, because rivers overflowed and coastlines changed and villages near water were sometimes destroyed overnight? Or was the flood more than a natural disaster? Was it a symbol so powerful that every civilization eventually found itself returning to it when trying to explain fear, punishment, renewal, and the fragile nature of human life? To understand why flood myths became so universal, we first have to understand what water meant to ancient people. Water was not just an element. It was the beginning of life and the threat of death at the same time. Every civilization depended on it. Rivers gave crops, rain fed the earth, seas carried trade, and springs made settlement possible. Without water, no city could live, no temple could be built, no kingdom could survive. But the same water that gave life could also take everything away. A river that had nourished a civilization for generations could rise in a single season and become a wall of destruction. The sea that connected distant lands could turn into a grave. Rain, which was prayed for in times of drought, could become a curse when it refused to stop. Water was generous, but it was never fully obedient. It crossed borders, ignored walls, entered homes, covered roads, swallowed names, and turned the achievements of human hands back into mud. That is why the flood became one of mythology's most frightening images. Fire destroys what it touches, but water transforms the entire world. It does not simply burn a house or break a wall. It changes land into sea, roads into rivers, cities into ruins, and memory into silence. A flood does not need hatred. It does not need a weapon. It does not need to choose its victims. It only needs to rise. And in that rising, ancient people saw something larger than disaster. They saw the possibility that all human order was temporary. They saw that the world could return to the formless state from which creation first emerged. In many myths, creation begins with water, with chaos, with a dark and endless deep before land is separated, before sky is lifted, before life is shaped. The flood reverses that creation. It is not merely death. It is uncreation. It is the world being pulled backward into the beginning. In the Mesopotamian flood story, one of the oldest surviving versions known to us, the gods decide to destroy humanity because human beings have become too noisy, too numerous, too disruptive. This detail is deeply unsettling. Humanity is not necessarily condemned for one single crime, but for becoming unbearable to the divine order. The world of humans has grown too loud for the world of gods. Then one god secretly warns Utnapishtim, telling him to build a great boat and preserve life before the waters come. When the flood arrives, it is not described as a gentle cleansing. It is total terror. The storm breaks open the world, the waters rise, and the old human order disappears. But when the flood finally ends, the survivor remains as a living bridge between the world before and the world after. He carries the memory of a civilization that no longer exists. This pattern returns in Greek mythology through the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. Zeus looks upon humanity and sees corruption, violence, arrogance, and moral decay. The human age has become rotten, and so the king of the gods sends a flood to wash it away. Only Deucalion and Pyrrha survive, guided through the catastrophe until the waters recede. But what happens after the flood is just as important as the flood itself. They do not simply return to normal life, because there is no normal life left to return to. The old humanity is gone. To restore the human race, they cast stones behind them, and from those stones new people arise. It is a strange and powerful image, because it suggests that after the flood, humanity is reborn not from comfort, but from hardness, from endurance, from the bones of the earth itself. The flood does not just punish. It strips humanity down to what cannot be softened. In India, the flood appears through the story of Manu, who is warned by a fish that a great deluge is coming. Manu protects the fish, and in return the fish guides him through the coming destruction. He builds a boat, survives the flood, and becomes the ancestor of a renewed humanity. But in this tradition, the flood is not only a punishment. It is part of a larger cosmic rhythm. Worlds do not simply begin once and continue forever. They rise, decline, dissolve, and return. Creation and destruction are woven into the structure of time itself. The flood is not only an accident or a divine reaction to human failure. It is a transition between ages. The old world must end so that another can begin. This vision is terrifying, but it is also strangely calm, because it suggests that destruction is not outside the order of the universe. Destruction is one of the ways the universe breathes. In Chinese traditions, flood stories often take a different shape. The Great Flood is not always solved by escape, but by control, discipline, and the restoration of order. Figures such as Gun and Yu are remembered in relation to the struggle against overwhelming waters, and Yu the Great becomes especially important because he does not merely survive the flood. He manages it. He channels the waters, works with the land, and turns chaos back into a livable world. This tells us something profound about the culture that preserved the story. The flood is still chaos, but the answer is not only divine rescue or chosen survival. The answer is labor, responsibility, engineering, endurance, and moral authority. In this version, humanity is not saved only by hiding from the water. Humanity is saved by learning how to live with forces greater than itself. Every flood myth reveals not only what a civilization feared, but what it believed could save it. In Mesopotamia, survival depends on secret divine knowledge. In Greece, it depends on moral selection and rebirth. In India, it depends on recognizing cosmic cycles. In China, it depends on discipline and the restoration of order. The water may be the same symbol, but each culture sees its own reflection in it. This is why flood myths are not simply stories about floods. They are stories about the relationship between humans and the forces that surround them. They ask whether disaster is punishment, whether survival is fate, whether knowledge can preserve life, whether morality matters, whether civilization can be rebuilt, and whether humanity deserves another beginning. The most haunting question inside every flood myth is not, why did the water come? But what is worth saving? When the whole world is about to disappear, what do the survivors carry with them? In some stories, they carry animals. In others, they carry seeds. In others, they carry sacred law, ritual knowledge, family lines, memory, or the blessing of the gods. The boat, the ark, the mountain, or the chosen survivor is never just a detail of the plot. It is a container of meaning. It holds whatever a civilization believes must not be lost when everything else is washed away. A flood myth forces a culture to imagine the end of its own world, and then decide what should be protected from oblivion. It is one of the most powerful questions mythology can ask. If your world vanished tomorrow, what would you save so that the future could still remember who you were? This is why the flood is so closely connected to memory. Water erases. It covers graves, roads, houses, fields, and borders. It can make a city disappear so completely that only stories remain. Ancient people understood that civilizations do not only die when their bodies are destroyed. They die when their names are forgotten. The survivor of the flood is therefore not merely lucky. The survivor becomes the keeper of memory. He or she remembers the world that drowned. This is a lonely and sacred role. To survive the flood means to live after your own world has ended. It means to carry the past into a future that cannot fully understand it. It means becoming proof that humanity has already lost everything once and still continued. Perhaps this is the deeper reason flood myths feel so powerful even now. They do not speak only to ancient farmers or sailors or river communities. They speak to the fear that everything solid in our lives may be more fragile than it seems. Every city believes it will stand. Every empire believes it is permanent. Every generation believes the world it knows is the real world. But mythology whispers something darker. It says that roads can vanish, towers can fall, languages can be forgotten, and sacred places can sink beneath silence. The flood is the great reminder that civilization is not nature's master. It is only a temporary shape built against chaos. And yet, flood myths are not only stories of despair. If they were, they would end with the drowning. But they do not. The waters recede. The mountain appears. The boat comes to rest. The survivor steps onto wet earth. A sacrifice is made, a sign is given, a covenant is formed, a new law begins, or a new generation rises. The flood destroys, but it also clears. It brings terror, but it also creates the possibility of renewal. In that sense, the Great Flood is both nightmare and hope. It is the nightmare that everything can end, and the hope that not everything must be lost. It is the fear of erasure and the belief that memory can cross even the deepest water. This may be why so many civilizations remembered a great flood. Real floods certainly shaped ancient memory. Rivers overflowed. Storms destroyed settlements. Seas rose. Communities living near water saw with their own eyes how quickly the world could change. But the mythic flood became more than a record of disaster because it gave disaster meaning. It transformed terror into story. It turned survival into destiny. It made the end of the world imaginable without making it final. The flood allowed humanity to say, yes, the world can be destroyed, but a boat can remain. A mountain can rise. A seed can be saved. A memory can survive. A new beginning can come from the ruins of the old. Maybe the ancient flood never truly ended. Maybe it only changed its language. Today we speak of collapse, climate, extinction, rising seas, lost cities, broken systems, and uncertain futures. Ancient people spoke of gods, storms, boats, mountains, and sacred warnings. But beneath both languages is the same human fear. What happens when the world we trust can no longer hold us? And beneath that fear is the same impossible hope, that something can still be carried forward, that someone can remember, that what matters most can survive the water. So when we ask why every civilization remembered a great flood, the answer may not be only that floods happened everywhere. The answer may be that the flood gave humanity one of its oldest and most powerful ways to imagine destruction without surrendering completely to it. The flood says that civilization can vanish, that pride can be drowned, that the world can return to chaos in a single terrible moment. But it also says that endings are not always empty. Sometimes a survivor remains. Sometimes a story crosses the water. Sometimes the future begins with someone standing alone on wet earth, looking back at everything that was lost and still choosing to build again.